I'd like to call this special meeting of the City Council and all of our wonderful boards and commissions to order, please. Can I have roll call?
Mayor Harris, Vice Mayor Baumgarten.
Here.
Councilmember Cardoza.
Here.
Councilmember Espandola. Councilmember Shaw.
Here. I want to extend Mayor Harris's, he will not be here tonight. He's dealing with a family issue, but we will make sure he gets the information. And Councilmember Espandola will be in here a little bit late. At this time, we have the appearance of interested citizens. Does anybody wish to speak before us before we get started? Seeing none. At this point, I'd like to introduce our city attorney, Mr. Shannon Chaffin, who will handle the majority of tonight's presentation.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And if the council likes, you can certainly come down to the audience or my back's going to be to you. So if you don't mind that, that's fine. If not...
Are you okay with it?
Hey, with you guys getting my back, I'm fine. But I just want to make sure you're fine with it. Welcome, everyone. This is workshop training. First of all, I wanted to thank you all for coming and thank you for your service with regards to the boards and commissions and all the many things that you do. I hope to make this a fairly straightforward presentation tonight. I do have a lot of agenda items to cover, including my PowerPoint presentation clicker, which City Manager is handing to me. My goal is to move through this fairly quickly. Some of this may be old hat to some of you, some of it may be new information. If you have any questions, slow me down. I have more details in my PowerPoint. You do have the PowerPoint presentation in front of you as well if you need it for references purposes. I also have a copy of the Rosenberg's rules for you. All the rules, that's the entire set of rules in your hand as well. So with that, we'll get started.
Shannon, could you put the mic up a little bit?
A little bit higher than this?
So that we can hear you a little better back here, because it's not really coming back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope this is a little bit better and I'll try to speak right here. Is this better for everyone?
Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. First of all, my name is Shannon, in case you saw it on the first slide. I'm from Sharon Weiner, I'm the city attorney. Here are the topics we'll be covering this evening. Basically, is the overview of the city structure, who's doing what, the meeting rules under the Brown Act, when the Brown Act applies, when the Brown Act applies, what we need for an agenda, how to conduct a meeting under the Rosenberg's Rules of Order, the types of motions and rules under Rosenberg's, the role of the presiding officer, working with staff, and other considerations. There is no way we can possibly get through all the information in the time that I want to in one meeting. So some of this will be a little bit light. Some other topics like AB 123 conflicts of interest, those sorts of things, those are things we'll only lightly touch on tonight, but they are considerations in your role. So overview of the city structure. This is kind of the big picture of where everything fits in. At the very top of the city structure, you have the city council. They are the legislative body of the city council. They are elected, one of the few electeds out there from the city and responsible for establishing overall policy direction of the city in compliance with the law, of course. They appoint the city manager and the city attorney. Additionally, we have the Planning Commission, and you'll note that I have the general plan up there because the Planning Commission is involved with the general plan and planning documents quite a bit. They are appointed by the City Council. They are responsible for reviewing and acting on matters related to planning and development. They take action in compliance with the policy direction of the City Council set by the municipal code and the city's adopted regulations, policies, and federal and state law. They're supported by city staff, city attorney, etc. Next, we have other various boards and commissions. I've listed a few on there. There's the personnel commission's not up there. There's many commissions that aren't there, but the city has a lot of them. They are generally appointed and confirmed by the city council. These commissions typically serve in an advisory capacity, making recommendations to other bodies or to other individuals, depending on what that may be. They are supported by city staff, the city attorney, etc., as may be appropriate. Then we have the city manager. Your city manager here is Mr. Michael Rock. He is responsible for the administration and day-to-day operations of the city. He is administrative head. He has the power to administer employment decisions, including everybody except for the city attorney, and performs other functions as the council chooses to authorize by ordinance. He operates under the policy direction and control of the city council, except as otherwise required by law, and is responsible for implementing policy items. Notice that I'm emphasizing the word policy, because that brings us to the next person, the sorry, jumped ahead. City staff. They are hired under the authority of the city manager. They implement and administer the day-to-day affairs of the city under the direction of the city manager. They assist the city council and commission by preparing agendas, staff reports, presentations, providing documentation, responding to inquiries. And this is, I think, a very important one that I wanted to highlight. They are expected to use their expertise in order to assist you in your job as commissioners. And that expertise often involves looking through the code, applying the conditions, and everything else as part of that. And they do it consistent with the rules approved by the city council. So sometimes as a board, sometimes we have things come in front of us, you're like, why are you doing that? It's like, that's what the rules have been set by the municipal code is approved by the city council. They're expected to use their expertise in that regard. Then we have the city attorney, also appointed by the city council. City attorney is not a policy person. The city attorney is a legal advice person. Helps with ordinances, resolutions, preparing contracts, giving that sort of thing as part of it. My job as the city attorney is to warn of potential legal pitfalls. My job is also to defend the action once it's been taken. So I am both kind of a sword and a shield sort of person. My role is to give advice so that decisions can be made in a fully informed manner so that they can then go forward from there. Now, if you look at this, I do not make policy decisions on behalf of the city. I advise whether it can be done, not whether it should be done. And I take that role very seriously because I am not an elected official. I'm responsible to elected officials, and it should be the elected officials making those policy decisions and being implemented by the city manager. So let's talk about meeting rules under the Brown Act and why that's important. Because if it's not a meeting, or if it is a meeting, the Rosenberg's rules only apply to meetings. What is a meeting and how does that exactly work? Well, a basic rule is that meetings or legislative bodies must be open and public. And one of the first things people say is like, woohoo, I'm on a committee, I'm not a legislative body, I don't do ordinances, I'm home free. I don't have to do this. Well, under the Brown Act, they define legislative bodies differently. And it's basically if the city council has delegated any sort of authority to you, you now become that legislative body. And you notice all the boards and commissions that were appointed? Now you're the legislative bodies for the purposes of the Brown Act. So you have to comply with the Brown Act. So the purpose of the Brown Act is transparency, to make things open, to make things public, so that you're not doing legislative secret backroom deals where the public doesn't know about it and doesn't have an opportunity to participate in it. So why is this important? Because you do not want to go to jail. That's one reason. It's a misdemeanor to violate the Brown Act. Among other things, there's also court remedies, court costs. If you've taken an action as a body in violation of the Brown Act, there's a process by which the entire action can be undone and reset. And more importantly, I can guarantee you, you will be under a very high optical lens. The optics of violating the Brown Act are sometimes even worse than the penalties that you ultimately are assessed under for violation of the Brown Act. So from the experiences that I've had in other jurisdictions where I've seen that happen, you know about them. So what is a meeting? How does it apply? Why does it apply to us? Because if the Brown Act applies to meetings, you really don't need to worry about it if it's not a meeting, right? Well, that's kind of true. But a meeting basically is whenever you have a majority of the members of the body at the same time and place to hear, discuss, or deliberate on any item that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board or local agencies to which it pertains, and there's no need for the body to take action for gathering to be a meeting. So just because you all get together and you hear about something in your jurisdiction but you don't take any action, still a meeting. So there are rules for different types of meetings. One of them is serial meetings. Serial meetings are prohibited. They are defined as meetings that at any one time only involve less than a quorum. So if you have 7 members on your commission and a quorum is 4 members, but only 3 of them get together, that's less than a quorum, right? You're still fine with the Brown Act. But if you start rotating through until 4 or more are touched or part of that conversational string, then you are in violation of the Brown Act. So let's talk about the rules. And I'm going to quote it because this is an important quote, and I hate to do it to you, but it's important enough to quote. And that is, A meeting is any use of direct communication, personal intermediaries, or technological devices that are employed by a majority of the members of the body to develop a collective concurrence as to an action to be taken on an item by the members of the body is prohibited. And you see the little clip art I put up there with the tin can and the string? Any communication means any communication. If you are literally getting out your tin can and a string and communicating so that more than a majority is involved, you're in violation of the Brown Act. Brown Act doesn't care how you do it, it's the fact that it's done. So let's talk about two types of serial meetings. And the reason why I'm talking about serial meetings is usually these are the ones that trip people up. You don't realize it's happening or you walk into it inadvertently. There is the chain of direct communications between the decisions makers themselves. Commissioner 1 sends an email or text to Commissioner 2, who sends it to Commissioner 3, who sends it to Commissioner 4. Now we are in a serial meeting situation. The other situation is a series of communications between individual decision makers and a third party, such as a developer or a city staff person. So, for example, a developer has a right under the Constitution to speak to his council members or planning commissioners if they're so inclined. They can go and speak individually to each individual planning commissioner if they want, or each individual council member. That's fine. That is perfectly permitted. What is not permitted, where council member, and I'm sorry council members, I'll just pick on you for now. Council member 1 says, I'm in support of your project. Council member 2 says, I'm in support of your project. So they go to council member 3 and say, well, council members 1 and 2 are in support of my project. You should be in support of my project too. Now we have an intermediary, and council member 3 now knows what 2 other council members are thinking, whether he or she has made their determination. So once one person knows the thought of a majority, even if it's through a developer, even if it's inadvertently through the city attorney or city manager that passes it along, all of those are really big things. So you have to be very, very careful. And rule number 1 for violation of the Brown Act, if you want to avoid the Brown Act, please be very careful using texts and emails. Those are the number 1 ways to get into an inadvertent serial meeting. Just be careful. Don't hit reply all if at all you can possibly do it. Just don't do it. Be careful. So let's talk about what is not a meeting. Because a lot of people think, hey, I see 3 council members or 4 planning commissioners or the entire commission on the Parks Committee is here. It's a Brown Act violation. No, not necessarily. If you're at a conference, public meeting, social ceremonial exceptions, even if you have a majority of the people there, it's okay, provided that members do not discuss among themselves specific business within the body's subject matter jurisdiction. So if I'm on the Parks and Rec Committee, and there's a majority of us there, and we're saying, hey, how were your holidays? Hey, that's great, this is wonderful. And somebody says, well, hey, I think we need to add another bridge across Feather River Mills, or across Feather River. Well, we should do that. Well, that's not within the scope of the committee, it doesn't make a difference, right? Fast forward to city council. All the council members are there, they're talking along, talking about whatever, and another council member comes up and says, hey, we need more access into our city. We need to add another bridge, or 2 bridges, or 5 bridges, or whatever it is. Now you're starting to get into a potential Brown Act scenario. Since the communication's only one way, you're fine at that point. Did you have a question?
I do.
Yes.
A lot of times at conferences, they will talk about potential things you can do in your community.
Yes.
For example, transportation and traffic flow is one of those things. So in using what you just said about adding a Third River Bridge, as a result of that, is that exempt, or is, I mean, it's a conversation regarding a neutral, or not neutral, but
A general topic.
a general topic. So if you then meet up with your other fellow council members and you say, that was a really good topic and we need another bridge, what do you think? Is that treading on eggshells?
You're starting to get close. If it's at an open meeting, and you'll see this all the time with the city council, they have council reports. And at the end of the council reports, they'll say, hey, I attended such and such meeting with, I don't know, Spivka, LAFCO, whatever it may be. And they give a report on it. And this occurred, and this would be something I'd be really interested in. totally not a Brown Act because it's at a noticed public meeting, right?
I'm talking about having that conference
Yes.
at the conference.
Now, if at the conference they come up, and let's use something like a TOT, a transit occupancy tax, just to pick a different thing.
Okay.
So you have a big presentation on how you maximize revenues and tourism under TOT. And then the council members who are individually together get together and say, hey, that was a great conference. Still okay. Yeah, I really enjoyed it and I really learned a lot. Still okay. That's just fascinating, some of the things they brought up. Yes. We should think about some of the stuff. Okay. And then one of the council members says, I'm in support of a TOT increase. We need to do it for tourism. Now, you have all the members there knowing the opinion of at least one member and themselves. Technically not a Brown Act violation. Until the other member says, one other member says, I agree. Now you have everybody else knowing, Councilmember 1, Councilmember 2, plus myself, now I'm in a majority. So that's how you run into a Brown Act violation. So your city attorney and your staff are usually like, oh, let's be very careful, serial emails, watch what you do and communicate, talk about your family, your holidays, whatever the case may be. Or the other approach is what we call pick your second. Pick your second is if you want to talk to somebody about it, you identify the specific 2 people. If you're on the council, there's 5, you need 3 in order for majority. So any 2 can talk and be just fine with it. So you need to pick your second, make sure they haven't talked to anyone else first. Then you can carry on as deep as conversation as you want. And it's entirely appropriate because it's a minority.
Shannon?
Yes, sir.
What about a mixed group? So for instance, maybe you're at a chamber event and it's a government affairs committee and there's a couple planning commissioners and a city council or 2 city council, and there's a sidebar conversation between 2 planning commissioners and the city council, or just mix and match. Does it have to be from the same legislative body to violate the Brown Act?
It has to be from the same body. So you could have 7 or 8 people there, and as long as there was not a majority from any one body, you would not have a violation of the Brown Act. So there are some exceptions to the Brown Act. You, as boards and commissions, will likely not run into this. Planning Commission does on rare occasions, and that is closed session. Those are generally reserved for things where you don't want the public knowing things, such as how much you're willing to pay for a piece of property, how much you're going to be, your negotiation strategies for labor negotiations, who you want to hire or dismiss, or litigation or threats of litigation. So generally, from the Planning Commission perspective, you would see the attorney coming in on closed session saying, hey, there's been a threat of litigation, here's the legal exposure regarding this potential case, step through the risks and everything else for the Planning Commission, inform them, and then they can go out, can't talk about what happened in closed session. You can go out and then make decisions based on the legal advice they received in private. That's perfectly fine under the Brown Act, because there are exceptions for that. There are certain reporting actions that you have to take out after the Brown Act, which is the reason why, I don't know if you've watched a lot of council meetings, they'll say any items to report from closed session, Mr. City Attorney. Sometimes you have to report them, sometimes you don't. The list is there as for a sample of those. So let's talk about agenda rules under the Brown Act. You have a meeting. You don't want to take any action outside of a meeting. So, gosh, we're going to have a meeting. What do we need to do? The Brown Act requires an agenda. And there's a sample of the latest agenda the City Council used on January 21st. It's got to be posted. I know a lot of you know Terrell. She's the assistant runs it, and Tricia is. I thought Tricia was here this evening, maybe I don't say. Oh, Tricia. Tricia is the city clerk. They take care of putting together the agenda and posting. So they take care of it. So coordinate with them. You'll see it coming out. If you're having what's called a regular meeting, you've got to give 72 hours notice. If you're having a special meeting, 24 hours notice. So tonight technically is a special meeting. We only needed to give 24 hours notice, but they gave extra time just so everybody could prepare. The agenda doesn't have to be greatly in-depth. 20 words or less is a description, and you should be good to go on that. The other thing is agenda for regular meetings must provide a public comment period. And you will notice that even the one on the special meeting did as well. Agendas for special meetings, public comments are generally limited to just those items on the agenda. You can't just speak about anything in the jurisdiction like you could at a regular meeting. The body cannot discuss or take any action on an item not appearing on the agenda. That bears stating a second time. If it's not on the agenda, you can't take action on it because it's a violation of the Brown Act. So don't think about adding things to the agenda. It's subtracting is what you can do. There are some narrow exceptions. You can briefly respond to comments during the public comment period. You can ask staff for clarification. You can make brief announcements regarding your own activities. And there are certain true emergency and urgency items that require, in some cases, a 4/5 vote, certain findings to be made, complete steps. If you're running into a circumstance like that, please contact your liaison that you have, and as appropriate, they'll be contacting our office to help step you through that process. So let's talk about documents. As a board of commissioners, especially planning commissioners and city council, sometimes you have documents that are literally this thick. I know for a fact that within the last 60 days, 60 to 90 days, some of you have had to go through this many documents for your board or commission. If you're getting that 72 hours in advance, usually most board and commissions like, I want this material as early and often as possible. Unfortunately, Yuba City staff give out stuff as early as they possibly can, and they're very, very good at getting you the information that you need when you need it. Which means some people may think, well, hey, I need this information. I'm used to having it early, or definitely making it easily accessible. How come something got out late or at the last minute or showing up at the city council meeting itself or the planning commission meeting itself? That can't be right. Putting aside whether that's right or not, it's legal. So information can be provided at the hearing itself. This PowerPoint presentation, that's information that you're getting new tonight, right? It's being provided at the hearing itself. Same thing with documents, including documents from the public as may be presented as items. So that information can come in. Staff can access that and give additional information to you. It technically, it's great to post it with the agenda, but it's not legally required to post with the agenda. Though as staff can tell you, they make every effort to make sure that you have the information up front and on time. So let's go to how to conduct a meeting. This may be old hat for some of you. But we've actually changed things around a little bit, and now the city is using Rosenberg's Rules of Order. And I want to show you, just by looking at Rosenberg's, this is Rosenberg's. I copied and printed out the entire thing, including the front page and the back page, which has nothing on it, right? Pretty picture in the back page. It's less than 10 pages long. The latest edition of revised shortened rules, abridged rules of Robert's Rules of Regs that I saw, just under 400 pages of small print. It's a small novel. From my perspective, at least, this is so much easier and better to use. Unless you're running Parliament, that may be great for Parliament on Robert's Rules, but Judge Rosenberg down at Davis actually developed these rules and figured out a way to run a meeting quickly, efficiently, and just as easily as can possibly be done. So I'm going to step those through you tonight and how a meeting would go under the Rosenberg's rules, which have been adopted. So the big issue is let people know what you're going to do it, then tell people what you've done. It's about an issue of communication. So there's general steps for a meeting. The very first thing when you come into a meeting and you get ready to sit down or do whatever it is, make sure you have a quorum. A quorum is at least a majority of the body. The default rule is that a quorum is one more than half. If there's not a quorum at any time in the meeting, you have to stop the meeting. You can't conduct business on less than a quorum. So, hey, we've got a quorum, that's great. Next question is, well, is the chair present? Is the presiding officer present? If the answer is yes, that's great, the chair runs the meeting. If the answer is no, then it goes to the vice chair or vice mayor or whoever it is, and they preside. And if neither is present, well, after the meeting is called to order, the board or commission basically selects their chair, and that chair runs the meeting until the actual chair or vice chair shows up. So you kind of have the acting chair. So whoever it is calls the meeting to order. The meeting can be called late, but it cannot be called early. You notice everyone was here, ready to go well before 6 o'clock, but the chair in this particular case waited exactly to 6 o'clock, boom, then gavelled in and ready to go, because that's what was actually on the agenda for the notice. So the way to do that by the chair is just as simply, I call the meeting in order. Doesn't have to be fancy, just get it done. If there's no chair or vice chair, the person who calls the meeting to order is the clerk. or secretary. They will call the meeting to order for the limited purpose of selecting an active chair. And Patricia has done that at least once in the last 2 or 3 months that I'm aware of. So sometimes that happens. So, next, follow the agenda. Some of you may have a process for approving an agenda, removing items from agenda, but once you have an agenda, please follow the agenda. Don't add items to the agenda. Don't skip items unless you formally skip them. Just go through the agenda. The presiding order officer can move things around, and a majority of the board or commission can move it around if the presiding officer doesn't want to. So that is permissible to change it along the way, and sometimes you'll see that. There'll be people coming for an item that's fourth down and you want to hear it first. Perfectly fine to move it up. But make sure you get everything on the agenda and it's clear what's happening. Next rule, call each agenda item. Generally, items cannot be combined or heard at the same time. This is especially true with regards to public hearing items. So you have to have a conditional use permit for property 1 and another conditional use permit for a completely separate property. You can't combine the items and hear them together. They must be called separately. If an agenda item is continued or removed by the commission earlier in the meeting, the presiding officer should briefly note that and then continue it. So you come down to an item that was removed, just like agenda item 1D has been removed from the agenda. We now go to agenda item 1E. Just as simple as that. And then once all agenda items have been called, just adjourn the meeting. I adjourn the meeting. And you're done. Though it helps to note on the record what time it is. Yes, and if we could get the microphone close to you if you have a question.
Does adjournment require a motion to adjourn, or does the chair just simply say the meeting is adjourned?
It technically depends on the bylaws. The bylaws, sometimes approved by the body, will say there needs to be a majority to amend or adjourn. But without something in the bylaws, the chair can just amend it or just say, hey, I adjourn, unless a majority of the members say, no, we re-adjourn and get back into it. So how do you actually go through an agenda item? And this is where we're getting in the nitty-gritty of how to actually use Rosenberg's rules. So the very first thing you do, of course, the agenda item is called by the chair. I now call agenda item 1D. And certain agenda titles should be read in full, either when the motion is being made or when the agenda item is being called. It's usually related to resolutions and ordinances. That helps streamline the waiving of the readings and move things along as well. After that, you should have an opportunity for conflicts and disclosures. This is big, and sometimes it gets skipped because people are moving along. But members should announce any conflicts and recuse themselves. And my example is through the chair. In other words, they're asking the chair for permission to speak or for recognition. Yes, Commissioner Hunt. I live across the street from this property and I will be recusing myself for this item as I have a conflict. Commissioner Hunt then leaves the room for the duration of the agenda item. Notice they stated their name, stated the nature of the conflict, and that they would be leaving for the agenda item. So they're not participating in the process at all. So if you have a conflict, that's the process to do it, and the time to do it is then. Then you have the presentation. The chair should invite the appropriate people to report on the item. This usually typically involves a staff report. And staff will come up, make the presentation on the item, give you the information that you need. The chair should invite all the appropriate people to report on the item. The way to do that is the staff have a presentation, staff, or would the applicant like to address the body? In the case of the Planning Commission, that's very common as well. So after staff has had an opportunity to speak, they say, would the applicant like to speak as well? Can't require them to, but you can invite them to. Yes, ma'am.
So the previous slide, there was conflicts and disclosure. So that is the point when I've met with so-and-so and talked to them about this?
No, when I mean that's a very good question.
Yes.
Conflicts means conflicts of interest under the Political Reform Act or AB 1234 or the FPPC rules. So as a rule of thumb, I call it the $500 rule. If you are 500 feet from within this property that's being decided of, if you have some sort of financial interest with the developer or something else associated with the property, or if you have a rule that you don't like this person or like them, in other words, a bias basically for or against them, and it's usually a bias in favor of the person more than against them, you may be required to recuse yourself. So if you see any of those, hey, I've got a money interest, I'm within 500 feet or so, I'm close, or I just feel so strongly about this project, I will either approve it or not approve it, despite what the facts are. Those are those sorts of disclosures. That's for conflicts. However, there are other disclosures, and that is when, and I don't want to get too complicated, you're basically acting in what's called a quasi-judicial capacity. That's where you're making a decision as to a particular project or person or parcel. It's very specific. It's not like the general plan or something else, like the CUP, the site plan. That's very common in the Planning Commission. When you do that, you're supposed to only receive information that's presented at the hearing. However, if you happen to drive by the site every day on your way to work, so you're aware of the visual conditions that are there, you should at least key up and say, hey, I drive by the site every day at work, I see it, this is what I've observed, or, I'm not going to make any decisions tonight based on what I've observed, it's only what's going to be presented this evening. Likewise, if a developer has contacted you and you've received information from them that you are planning on using that evening, that information has to be disclosed. And the reason for that is it's not fair, or even somebody that's opposed to the project. If you're planning on relying on that particular information, it's not fair to make a decision based upon information only you have and nobody else has. So there's kind of a process where you have to be careful about how that's done. So again, if you're on a board and commission, you're starting to get in those situations, contact your liaison, and they will help step you through that process as well. I hope that answered your question without getting too deep. Okay, thank you. So once the presentation's been made, usually it's an opportunity for questions from the board or commission. Usually the chair will say, do any members on my left have any questions for staff? On my right? Okay, then you proceed on. The next step from that is open the public comments or the hearing. The chair should invite the public comments or open the meeting to public input at a more formal meeting. An example of that, is there anyone here from the public that would like to speak on this item? Or I now open the public hearing on this matter. Would anyone like to speak on this matter? Now, public comments, motions, debate may not be required for certain items such as ceremonial presentations and workshops. Technically, there does not need to be, this meeting that we're having now, this workshop, there's no right to public comment on this particular workshop. It's a workshop. Same thing with ceremonial presentations. Just because you don't like the presentation being done, you don't have a right to speak on it. Then you receive public comments. They should be made at the dais, on the microphone, recorded on the record. Names and addresses can be requested, but are not required in order to be able to speak at a public meeting. Unless additional time is granted or set differently by your bylaws, I think everybody here uses about 3 minutes. If that goes longer, if you're inclined to let people to go longer because there's usually not very many people that show up and want to speak and there's only one person, great. But what you give to one, you have to give to all. You can't allow your friend to speak for 20 minutes on a project and then apply the 3-minute rule to everyone else. It's just a rule of fundamental fairness. And the remarks should be addressed to the body as a whole. So if you're a chair and somebody starts turning around and saying, that commissioner, blah, 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 and I hate this staff member, and I'm going to get your children, and why aren't you doing this? It's time to focus the attention back on the chair, back on the board. They are made to the board. They are made to the commission. They are not made to individuals.
Hold on. Bullet number 2, names and addresses can be requested but not required.
Yes.
So, can, could, should, would.
You can request them.
Okay.
But if they don't want to give them, they don't have to. Or they could even give them a fake name. I've had Donald Duck speak before.
So as a matter of just practice and consistency, one would think that you would be asking for it on anybody who approaches the microphone.
Yes.
Rather than here, there, and everywhere.
Yes. So, come to the microphone. Please state your name and address for the microphone. Some people may not want to state their address, for example. They don't have to. And then the next person comes in. Step to the dais, please state your name and address for the record. That's perfectly acceptable because it's a request. So if they say, I don't want to, or they say, I'm Donald Duck, that's fine. But at least you've made your effort to keep the record as clear as possible. Did that answer your question? Excellent. So, public comments continued. Here's another key one. This is the public's time to comment. Comment goes this direction. It's not a question and answer period. It's a public comment period. There's a big distinction between that. While questions can be asked by the public, no member of the body or the staff can respond to the question without permission of the presiding officer. This is typically done at the end of public comment. So what I typically see on this is If a question's asked, say, thank you very much for your question, staff will answer that at the end of public comment. Or they'll say, or you even have discretion as a chair, staff, if you can answer this in 30 seconds, please do so. If not, we'll get it at the end of public comment. The other thing is you usually get more meaningful responses from staff when they have more than 3 seconds to think about the response. So, as a general rule of thumb, my suggestion to you is receive all the comments, staff are listening, they're writing stuff down, and then as the board or body, you can then focus the questions that you want to have particularly answered after public comment is closed. So another thing, the public has a right to videotape or record the meeting so long as it doesn't create a persistent disruption. So we have people in here video and audio taping all the time. However, if they're getting right up in front and shoving their camera in the board's face or not allowing people to speak because of that, or making it a fire and exit hazard in violation of an ADA compliance rules, you can't get people back and forth safely. Those are the considerations you want to state, move them to a place where they can take place without interfering with fire access, ADA access, or interfering with the meeting. So you have to have some annoyance sometimes, but it has to be persistent. Then after the public comment has been completed, you close it. And the way to do that is typically, are there any more public comments? Pause. I now close public comment. Or this item is now returned to bring this matter back to the Planning Commission or the Senior Commission or whatever it happens to be. Then this is the opportunity, once public comment has been shut off, that's done, and the hearing, especially in quasi-judicial proceedings, staff are like, close the public comment, your city attorney is. Close the public comment, because that stops the evidentiary record. That stops it, right? So things are not continually coming in. Then you can ask questions as a board member or a commissioner. So if you have any pressing questions that came up during public comment, that is, if they haven't been responded to, you have the opportunity to ask those questions because you are going to be the decision maker, right? So you have the opportunity to ask staff those questions, and usually they're in the back while the questions are being asked, prepping the response so they're ready for you. So, example, if you're the chair, one of the things you can do is, does anyone have any questions for staff? Simple question. And then, you can go on your left, you can go on your right, depending on how big the body is, and go forward from there. So just ask if anybody has any questions. Then next, after all the questions have been asked, invite a motion. Would anyone like to make a motion? Is there a motion? And if you are the one making the motion, be recognized by the chair, through the chair, or Mr. Chair, or Madam Chair, or whatever you want to do. Through the chair, yes. The chair recognizes Commissioner Smith, or even just her name, Commissioner Smith. Response, Commissioner Smith then makes the motion. After you make a motion, there must be a second. There must be at least 2 people who agree on a motion, or the motion dies for lack of a second. So you need to have a second, and it's the same thing. A motion has been made by Commissioner Smith. Is there a second? A second is made. Through the chair, I'd like to second the motion. Okay, a second has been made by Commissioner Doe. So now you've got your first, you've got your second, you can move forward. So you usually confirm the motion if you're the chair, so everybody knows what's going on and the public knows. So there is a motion on the floor to approve a recommendation to the council regarding an update to the municipal code regarding whatever the topic item happens to be. So you've stated it. Then you can have debate on the motion. Because sometimes the first motion is not what you ultimately want to adopt, or other members, there may not be a majority for it. So you have a debate on it. Would anyone like to discuss the motion? And when I say debate, it's not the traditional debate that you see where 2 attorneys are getting up and screaming at each other or something. That's not what I mean by debate. It's basically, for Roberts or Rosenberg's, debate means a discussion. So, would anybody like to discuss this item? A lot of the times there's no discussion, you move immediately into a vote. Sometimes there is. Sometimes people say, hey, I would be supportive of this recommendation or this project, however, I'm concerned about A, B, and C. Could I do a friendly amendment? And if both the first and the second agree, yeah, okay, fine, then you have the friendly amendment. But we'll get into substitute motions and replacement motions just a little bit later. So would anyone like to discuss the motion? Then assuming there's no further discussion, the chair takes the votes. Is there any further response? All those in favor say aye. Response, all those against say nay or say no. Then you announce the vote. So you tell people what happened. The motion passes 5-2 with Commissioners Rowe and Fletcher dissenting. So the presumption is the other three voted for it. So you need to know who dissented. So you usually list who dissented. Or the motion was approved unanimously is another one. And then you call the next agenda item. So the good news is we're well over the hump and going downhill on this technical sort of stuff. And I realize that it can be kind of drinking through the fire hose. But this gets into probably the most complicated stuff on Rosenberg's, which is a heck of a lot less than Robert's rules. But once you see these, once you read them, hopefully you'll understand, for those of you who haven't done this, how this works. Basically, remember there's 3 types of motions. 3. There's your basic motion. I move, we, whatever, second the motion, go. Once a basic motion has been made, then there can be a motion to amend. I move we amend your motion, but add the following conditions or reduce the following conditions 1, 2, and 3. That amendment also has to have a second. The other motion is a substitute motion. That's basically saying, yeah, that's great. That first amendment, that first motion you made was great, but I want to make a completely different motion or substitute motion. Sometimes there's overlap on the two, but the chair is the one who basically makes a decision as to what type of motion it is. So, 2 steps. Person makes the motion, there's a second to the motion. Person makes a motion to amend, there's a second to the motion to amend. Or a person makes a substitute motion, there's a second to the substitute motion. Sometimes you can get multiple motions on the floor. We call this the City Attorney Employment Act, right? You call it a headache when it happens to you. And the reason for that is you've had the first motion made, then you may have a second motion made, or a substitute motion, and then you may even have a third substitute motion made. So what do? If you were the chair, the general rule of thumb, pick off the last one first and move your way up the line. So if you have substitute motion number 3, say all those in favor of this, yes, no, and if it's approved, great. If it's not, then you go to the second motion. Okay, there's been a first and second on the second motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, the motion fails. 3-2, Commissioner so-and-so dissenting. Go to the main motion. The motion's been made, first and second on this. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, motion passes. 3-2, Commissioner so-and-so dissenting. So you go back, you go from the last backwards. Only allow 3 or it gets really complicated. So debate or not to debate. The rule is all motions are subject to discussion. There are some that are not. I've got them listed here. Motion to adjourn. You notice that was the very first one because it's so important. But when you adjourn, you cut off everybody else's voice. And the way to think about it is, does this cut off the voice of the minority? Adjourn, nobody can speak anymore once you adjourn. Recess, kind of the same thing. Motion to fix the time to adjourn, motion to table, motion to limit debate, all those, no debate, discuss them immediately, it's important, let's go. Some of them may require more than a majority vote, by the way, we'll get to that in just a bit. Votes, everything requires a majority. The easy rule of thumb is this. Sometimes you get 3 in favor, 2 against, 2 abstain. Has the motion passed? I'm like, the easy way and the answer to that is no. So you need, if you have 3 in favor, 2 abstain, and 2 against, that's 4-3. The motion doesn't pass. Even if it was 4-4, the motion still doesn't pass. You actually have to have an affirmative vote. 50% plus 1 is the rule of thumb. So there are exceptions, motion limited debate, close nominations, suspend the rules. Those require more than a motion, again, because they're affecting your ability to speak. Now, the municipal code or state law may require certain items to be passed by a supermajority. For example, city council, if you are making a mid-year budget adjustment, the state likes to discourage those sorts of things. They want budgets to be for a year and that you actually stick with your budget. But sometimes you have to make, if you're making big adjustments in certain ways, certain things have to be done. Other times, for minor items, it doesn't. So, rules for a motion to reconsider. A motion to reconsider requires only a majority vote to pass. However, it has special rules. You say, what's a motion to reconsider? Think of the reset button. Let's say everybody just voted on something, and then somebody realizes, oh my gosh, what have we done? Well, we may want to reconsider this, right? Well, we've already voted on it. How can you reconsider it? So there's a couple of rules. It must be made at the same meeting where the vote took place or at the next meeting. It may only be made by a member who is in the majority, the winning side the first time around. And I've actually seen people when they realize that it's going to be a tie vote and it's going to be defeated and the item's going to be done, but somebody's not there that's 10 minutes late, so they'll vote with the other side to defeat it. Then once the person comes, they now have a majority for their vote, and then they'll bring a motion for reconsideration. But since they voted on the winning side, they can now make that motion. So, don't know why they do it. This is one of the more complicated things, but there. So, anybody else can make a motion on the second. Doesn't make a difference if you're on the previous winning side or not. And what does it do? It basically hits the reset button. So now imagine that the original motion that was passed that you've now reconsidered is wiped out. So you still need another motion. It's like staff reports have been made, public comment's been closed, everything's done. Is there a motion? So you start over from that place. So rules of debate or discussion. Make sure you obtain the attention of the chair first or things get really out of control. Through the chair, through the mayor, however it's done, please obtain the recognition from the chair. Avoid personalities and what we call indecorous language. That's a fancy way of saying you work with these people, please do not scream at them or the public. It's not a good thing. We're all professionals here. I know it can make fun entertainment, but please refrain from doing that. There's 3 steps to open debate. Make your motion, seconded, and motion stated by the presiding officer, and then there's some debate on it. Now there are some exceptions. You can have staff presentations, questions to staff, and public hearings. You know, don't debate during staff presentations. That's not the time to get there making the presentation. Then after you've received all the information, please debate this. Role of the presiding officer. I think we're on time here. The presiding officer is charged with applying the rules of conduct to the meeting. For all intents and purposes, the presiding officer makes a final ruling every time the presiding officer states an action. That is the case. Motion passes unanimously. If you disagree with that because you were screaming no at the top of your voice, make it clear, because the decision of the presiding officer can be overruled by a majority. But they're final, even if you screamed no really, really loud or thought that you did, and they just didn't hear you. So sometimes if just make the record clear. But role of the presiding officer is also different than the typical commissioner or board meetings. Chairs have a lot of power, but they have a lot of responsibility. In some ways, they have the same authority as any other chair. It's all equal. But you have more control over the way the proceedings are going. So it's a usual courtesy for the presiding officer to play a less active role in the debate and discussion than other members of the body. For this reason, some people will actually go to someone else other than the chair to advocate for them if they are really feeling strongly about something. So on councils, for example, they may not go to the mayor. They may go to somebody else because the mayor's role, as a matter of courtesy to everyone else, is more of a secondary facilitating role as part of that. And I don't know if you've seen that. If you've watched council meetings, you will see that Mayor Harris always responds last, makes his decisions usually last, usually does not make motions under most circumstances, gives the opportunity to somebody else. So you'll see that. But as a member of the body, all of you have equal authority and right. Perfectly entitled to vote on items. Perfectly entitled to do that. The presiding officer should strive to be the last to speak at the discussion and debate stage. The presiding officer should generally refrain from making or seconding a motion unless the presiding officer is convinced that no other member of the body will do so at that point in time. There's also another, what I would call unwritten, not official rule, and that is the chair, if it's something that's really super important to them or something that they've introduced and shepherded across, will occasionally make the initial motion. And that's, you've been working on something big, you like to make the motion on that, and that's generally understood, that under those circumstances, the chair will do it. So let's talk about courtesy and decorum. The rules of order are meant to create an atmosphere where the members of the body and the public can attend business efficiently. One person speaking at a time, please. And sometimes that can be difficult. Every member desiring to speak first should gain recognition of the presiding officer and confine himself or herself to the question or debate, avoiding personalities. And wait, did I go backwards? Here we go. Generally don't interrupt the speaker. If someone's speaking, let them speak. There are some exceptions, point of privilege. So if the lights suddenly go off and you can't see your page that's in front of you, raise a point of privilege because you can't get the information or your equipment's not working, do that then. Point of order, where there's something's being done that's not appropriate for the conduct of the meeting, if there's an appeal to the chair's decision or withdrawing a motion. So sometimes if you made a motion and then people are like, this is the worst thing ever and blah, 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 and they bring up something you didn't think about, you're like, oh, hold on, you know, I'm just gonna withdraw the motion. So you can withdraw them. So can I make just one thing about working with the community when you have community speakers? Sometimes you do have community speakers that come up that are very, very passionate about a certain topic and item, and it's absolutely fantastic. We live in a democracy where people come up and get passionate about some sort of things. Sometimes they fully understand the project, sometimes they don't understand the project, but when people get passionate, sometimes they don't act in ways that they would normally act in society. And so if you have somebody who's come up and you're keeping to your 3-minute rule and they're passionately talking about something, and you say, as a chair, you know, hey, your 3 minutes is up, could you wind it up in a sentence or two? And they keep on going and say, you know, Mr. So-and-so, your time is up, could you please let the next speaker speak? And they keep on going, and then they chain themselves to the dais, and they're not going to leave, and you're going to listen to what I say, and this is really important, and then whatever starts happening. There are processes for removing them, or shutting off the microphones, or doing these other sorts of things. Go for the easy one. Call a recess. If it gets out of control, call a recess. That allows everybody to cool off. And if everybody leaves, the person who's chained themselves to the dais is going to feel pretty awkward, right? Usually most of them will leave at that particular point. But if you call a recess, it allows people to take a breath, get a control of their emotions, and it doesn't create awkward situations as much. Now, I know of one council that had to call a recess for 35 minutes while somebody was rampaging through the city council room until they got control over themselves. And it made great internet YouTube videos. But you don't want to be that person who's doing the rampaging. That's kind of more the exception to the rule. So my suggestion is when working with the public, be respectful, listen to them even if you may disagree with them. Don't argue with them. It's not going to change anything. The only thing that should be changing is the information that you're receiving or the conceptions that you may have been receiving. You may not be changing their minds. And then when the time is done, be respectful, have them step down, and allow other people the opportunity to exercise their First Amendment rights. So just a suggestion from stuff that happens, so I hope you're never in that situation. So let's briefly talk about working with staff. Oh, and it might help if I knew how to do this. So, a good relationship with city staff will help you accomplish your full potential. And a good relationship is built on mutual trust and respect, and here's some ways to receive that. Come to meetings having reviewed the materials prepared by staff. I've probably been at least 100 different cities, districts, organizations, JPAs, whatever, all across the state. Number one thing that I see for when mistakes are made or when there's tension going back and forth is when one of the council members, board members, or commissioners hasn't read their staff report, has been told something by somebody else that doesn't understand what's going on, and they immediately say, what are you doing? This is the most ridiculous project ever. And the poor staff member's thinking, but that's not the same project. We're on different ground. So it makes you look bad when you do something like that. It doesn't create good, engender good working environment when it does it. So if you could, please make sure you come to meetings prepared. The other thing, if you have pressing questions, reach out to staff early. It's okay to do that. Sit down or send them an email or something else and say, no, please don't copy any other planning commissioners or commissioners, board members, or anything else, because the Brown Act. Send them an email and say, I have a question about X, Y, and Z. Do you have a couple minutes before the meeting so that we can address that issue? And the other thing it does, or today or whenever it is, the other thing it does is it allows the staff to give you a more meaningful response. So you are better able to do your job as well. Now, if you do disagree with staff during a recommendation, please state the decisions. Why? Tell staff why you disagree with them. Don't just say, I hate this project, what are you doing? This is the stupidest thing ever. I've actually heard somebody say that. You guys would not be doing that. But what that does is staff, as you remember from the very first, one of the first slides, they're expected to use their expertise to give you recommendations based on the code approved by the city council. Everybody drops the ball at some point, but usually experts have at least some sort of background. Whether you disagree with them or not, that is perfectly up to you. That's perfectly fine. But if you do, let them know why. The reason is if your board or commission ends up denying certain things, staff has to come back with findings to support that. And if you hear, well, we just don't like it, we want to deny it, well, on what grounds? We just don't like it? That's not very helpful. So if you can articulate reasons, that's very helpful to staff because then they know what direction you're going and then they can help you reach where you want to go in as legally safe manner as you can. Clearly communicate to staff what the commission needs in order to make well-informed decisions. If your material is not being presented in an understandable way or you don't understand it, and believe me, Planning Commission, by the way, the material you get, it's hard to make simple. It is really, really hard. So anybody who in here is a planning commissioner, I feel it. There's a lot of information in there that has to be done. But if there's something that's not, you don't understand, sit down and talk with staff about it. Let them know. Give them that feedback to make it easier for you. Treat staff with respect. Don't assume the staff is wrong and a critic is right. And compliment staff when and where appropriate. So other considerations. Conflicts of interest. And I love putting up this little cartoon here, and I don't know if you can read it, but it says, it doesn't matter that you never got caught. So obviously it's like, well, I never got caught before, I can do that. I was speeding before and I never get caught, so I shouldn't be able to be caught again, right? So conflict of interest, there's a lot of different laws on this. They actually have courses that are like 2 hours long on conflict of interest and blah, blah, blah. We're not going to get into that tonight. But remember when I was talking about conflicts and making your disclosures? Please remember, it's your responsibility to determine if there's a conflict or to raise the issue if there's a conflict. It's not the city attorney's responsibility. I have a lot of superpowers, but I can't read people's minds. It's not staff's responsibility. It's not the other members of the boards and commissions. It's your responsibility. So under state law, you are personally responsible for making sure that you do that. So what tools do you have? There are liaisons for all of your boards and committees that you can reach out to and talk to if you have a potential. And in fact, sometimes staff will contact you and say, hey, we noticed that you're within 500 feet of this particular area, blah, 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 which is a big sign that you should be looking at a conflict sort of situation. Sometimes, in certain circumstances, the liaison will reach out to the city attorney, and then we can help step through some of those processes. I would caution, however, these sorts of things are very fact-specific. Everybody's circumstances are different. And so the earlier you can do it, the better. If you're doing it literally as the item is being called, and your liaison happens to be there, or your city attorney happens to be there, and you say, hey, do I have a conflict of interest? I've got blah, blah, blah. And they start asking you a series of questions, and eventually come to this, they'll say, okay, our recommendation is you're going to be to recuse yourself. We don't know 100% that you do. We don't know 100% that you don't. But again, back to one of my slides before, do you really want to risk going to jail over it? What is your staff or city attorney going to tell you? Recuse yourself. Announce recuse, step out, you're fine. There's also other resources. The FPPC has a free advice line, 866-ASK-FPPC, or at their legal advice. Usually, the advice line is usually pretty quick, but it's more general information. You can send them emails. They're usually responding fairly quickly nowadays. So if you see something, give it a try. That'll help. But keep in mind, just because you rely on their informal advice from the FPPC, it is not a get-out-of-jail-free card in case something goes horribly, horribly amiss. So, my suggestion is stay away from the edge when you've got a conflict. Don't walk up to the edge. That's one of the things you don't want to do. So, the good news is, we finished, I think, on time, back a little bit early. So, I'm available for any questions. I know this has been fast. I know there's been a lot of things. Yes, sir.
When any member votes to abstain, that's basically a no vote then?
Yeah, as a general rule, yes. So when any member votes to abstain, that can be it's considered a no vote or a non-affirmative vote. However, there is an exception, and I will tell you that's a big debate in the city attorney circles for the last, short period of time, decade or two, right? They move slowly. But it depends on your rules that have been adopted. General rule is if you've abstained, and your rules say, hey, any abstaining votes are counted as a present or an aye vote, then it's deemed as an approval. So sometimes you can have one person say yes, 3 people say I abstain, and the 5th one say no. And under the rules, that motion can pass 4-1. But again, that's digging a little bit deep.
But as a general rule, an abstain is a no vote.
Yeah, the general rule is abstain is you're not taking any action. It's a no vote because you are not making an affirmative vote. So it's not technically no, but it's not an affirmative vote, so it can't be counted towards an affirmative vote, so it has the effect of a no vote for passing anything.
Thanks.
Sorry to make that complicated.
No, I get it.
Yes, ma'am.
Going back to your discussion about the motion to reconsider.
Yes.
The motion to reconsider can be made at the next meeting rather than necessarily at the very meeting. If it's made at the next meeting, how does that work with the Brown Act? Because it's not on the agenda.
That's a very good question. So what you do is you contact city staff. The question was, if we do a motion to reconsider at the next meeting, it's not on the agenda. Aren't we in violation of the Brown Act if we try to bring a motion to reconsider? And the way that you do it is you actually contact the city clerk's office before. Have the item put on the agenda as a motion to reconsider, such and such item. You may, depending on the type of hearing, have to give notice to the people involved as well. So there may be certain notice provisions. So if it looks like there is going to be a motion for reconsideration, contact staff early, make sure it's on the agenda, because if it's not on the agenda, it's over. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. I realize this can be somewhat,
Yeah.
drinking from the fire hose. Oh, yes. Oh, Councilwoman.
Do I say through? Oh, okay. Do I say through Vice Mayor? What do I say? I think one of the questions that seems to often come up in many circles is this conflict of interest. So the place of residence of a person, and I'm thinking more of our planning commission, are they aware of that radius and how that conflict of interest circle area? I'm just interested to know, not necessarily.
They should be. I believe, is Terrell or Ben available? I think you send notice.
So you have those boundary maps,
Yep.
and so we'll check those on particular items.
So you check your boundary maps for particular items.
Correct.
And then if you're within the boundary maps, and you send them a notice and let the individual commissioner know?
Correct.
Alrighty, thank you.
Good. Thank you for clarifying that. I have not asked that before. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stand with my back to you. The rest of the people said they had my back, so I hope you do as well.
So yeah, you know that.
Then, through the chair. Couple of quick things. It not only is the physical boundary, but and especially in the Planning Commission, and Dell, I'm going to use you just as an example. If you have any financial interest because of the industry you're in, because you happen to be in real estate, that would also cause you to pull out as well. So Planning Commission has a difficult task because they got to make sure that there's the boundary rules plus the financial interest and relationships and stuff like that that would cause you to pull out. The two, I don't know if you want to call them pet peeves of mine because of being around so many boards and stuff over my life that I'd like to just toss out there is, number one, everybody gets enamored by this little guy right here and they always want to hit it. But under Roberts and stuff, the gavel's used to bring order back to the meeting. It's supposed to be hit upon commencement of the meeting and at the end of the meeting, and to bring it back to order. We don't have to hit the gavel every time we take a vote and everything else. But the other one, the big one, is every time we make a motion, the correct terminology and used it once is I move. And so oftentimes throughout commissions, the council, different boards and stuff, people are, I want to make a motion to do this, and the proper term should be I move, and then state the motion.
Yes. So that is technically the way to do it. I move to do X, I move to do Y. Does it mean that if you say I make a motion to do blah, 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 that it's not an effective motion? No, but no, dazzle them with your expertise. It's like Councilmember Shaw said, it's something that you can tell the little words that are used and how things are done. So say move. Move's better. Any other questions? Oh, yes.
It's me again.
You're always welcome to ask questions.
Back to the Brown Act. If a commissioner or a council person runs across an article of information that has nothing to do specifically with something that's legislative. For example, tomorrow I'm on the internet and I see a really interesting article about Rosenberg. If I were to forward that article to my fellow commissioners, is that a violation of the Brown Act? And why?
Well, first of all, is Rosenberg's within your jurisdiction? The answer to that is yes. If you are the ones that are selecting whether you do Roberts or Rosenberg's, it's within your jurisdiction. The second question is, well, if it's within my jurisdiction, who can I send it to? Can I send it to everyone? Under the Brown Act, still be okay? The answer to that is yes. Because it's a one-way communication, and now they may know what you think about Rosenberg's, but they don't know what a majority thinks about Rosenberg's. The problem is when we get people hitting the reply button on the emails, and somewhere your attorney starts getting that pain in his chest and a tingling on his arm and wakes up in the middle of the night saying, don't hit reply all, right? That's when you start running into problems.
But this is not, I mean, information about how we run the meeting is not it's not something that we're going to build or approve or disapprove or whatever. I'm not following the logic in this.
If it's something you decide, in other words, some boards can choose what rules they use. So if your board has the authority to choose what rules they use, and I don't know that there are any in Yuba City that do that, but theoretically, if the answer to that was yes, then you would. If the answer to that is no, well, you could send it off, and if it's not in your jurisdiction, you can certainly send it off. So for example, if you are concerned about homelessness in South Texas, you can certainly send that to any one of the board members. I would caution you, however, that you got to be careful about what you send back and forth, and technically anything that's related to your job being sent is a public record. So be careful what you write, be careful how you do it. So certain things can become public records depending on what you do. So for example, I'm just trying to think of something. Let's say that you had a transportation lobbying bill in Sacramento, right? It's going before the House for consideration. And the question you have is, could this bill affect my jurisdiction? So if they are switching to vehicle miles traveled, for example, which they've done, rather than doing level of service at intersections. In other words, they don't care how congested it is, just as long as you don't drive as far. That will actually affect how you make decisions as a planning commissioner. And so if you want to generally send out information about this bill saying, FYI, here you go, okay, that's one thing. If you start saying, I can't believe this is going to make our job so difficult, I'm not going to enforce it, that's another thing. So my rule of thumb is this: if you have something interesting, and I would hope that you do because you're all experts in your fields or you have expertise in your fields, share it at the meeting or make it available. Say, hey guys, go to this website, here's what it is. There you are. So it's available. So you can, when you do commissioner reports or when you do these reports at the end, that's the time to really be sharing information. The other thing is just don't share with the majority.
I was told at one point in time, if I had something interesting to share it with the director, and then the director would make the decision to disseminate it, and I don't follow the difference.
The difference is this: none of the council members or other commissioners know anything about your mental decision-making process. So if I send everybody a copy of Rosenberg's and say, hey, here's some Rosenberg rules for your consideration, you may have no idea who I got that from, and it may have been two planning commissioners coming in and say, hey, we really like these rules. See, as long as you don't know what a majority is doing, you can get the information, you can receive the information, you just don't know how everybody else is making the decision. So, can you distribute information? Yeah, send it to staff. And in fact, staff will often send information to you one way saying, hey, here's something else that we received from such and such, and here it is for your consideration. So it's just additional information. Yes, sir.
In terms of, and I understand this, a lot of the cities in California are following these. Does this also apply in a setting of like a nonprofit scenario with board members, or would that be a separate issue altogether?
It's a separate issue, and I hate to give you the attorney response, but it depends. The Brown Act has been like this, I don't want to call it this horrible plague, you know, reaching into places where it never was before, but it has definitely extended its tendrils into areas that traditionally you wouldn't even think would be, you know, school boards, for example, certain school things have it on. So nonprofits, Brown Act may apply to them, but not necessarily.
Okay.
So, but that's outside my scope because we don't have any nonprofits here.
And then a follow-up question. Would you go define for me, I think I have an understanding, define for me like the people recusing themselves or stepping out of the room for a vote. For example, if I worked for a contractor and I happen to be on the city council or on the board, and then there's a motion out to, hey, let's have this contract, wouldn't I, therefore, would it be ethical for me to just step right out of the room and say, oh, sorry?
Yeah, you are spot on. You need to recuse yourself. So the way that it would go, the agenda item would be called, hey, this is award a contract to ABC Corporation in the amount of, I don't know, $17,000 for road surfacing, right? You immediately key up, say, through the mayor, yes, you know, Mr. So-and-so, or, you know, council member so-and-so, yes, I'd like to announce that I work for so-and-so, they are my employer, and as such, I'm going to be recusing myself for this item. Then you literally step up, and in certain cases, you step to the back of the room where you're not participating, or out of the room, and then when that agenda item is completely done, then you call them back in. So the key is that they don't want to appear to influence, because what we're having people say, I recuse myself, and then they're in the back row staring at particular council members, giving them the evil eye, saying, you better not be doing this to my cousin or my wife's business or something, right? So that's the theory, not involved.
So in that context, then, this individual should not at all even be on those discussions.
That's right. Should not be influencing the discussions at all. And by the way, there are certain ethical considerations that staff have that sometimes they have to recuse themselves out of certain situations. Like their house may be next door to this, you know, I don't know, big box store that they don't want because they like the big open field, right? There's that question of whether or not there might be an implicit bias. And so out of abundance of caution, staff recuse themselves because they're within the 500-foot rule on some of these things.
So in other words, then to err in the side of caution and ethics as opposed to debating the issue, correct?
Yes. You know, the question is, how ethical are you? Nobody likes to answer that question. We've been arguing it for, 2,500 years, just as Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates. But, yeah, please stay away from the edge. That's all I got to say. Please stay away from the edge. Any other questions or comments?
Just a couple thoughts. Blind copying people is a good practice. So if you want to just send an information or an article, that's great. And if you blind copy everyone else, they cannot forward it to anyone else after that point. Also, staff are conflicted out. If they have to file a Form 700, then they have to follow all the conflict of interest rules. Any staff member that files that form, including all elected officials, city managers, city attorneys, and all department heads, would also be subject to certain conflicts, which was an important point that it applies to staff as well.
Yes. So the idea is a fair process, an open process, a transparent process. And then they passed a bunch of rules defining exactly what that is to make it really complicated. But if you can keep those three principles in mind when it comes to conflicts, that's what you need. And I must say this. It used to be you could, what I call the gut check. Does this feel right? You used to be able to rely on that, but it's now become so complicated, you can't rely on your gut all the time. And there have been circumstances where people have been like, hey, I'm donating this property to the city or selling it at a fair market price, and the city attorney told me I could vote on this contract and it would be okay because, we've done an appraisal and done everything else. And then the city ends up with the property, the council member ends up having to disgorge all the funds for buying the property, in other words, lost everything, has to pay the person who's bringing the challenge's attorney's fees and costs. Press is completely barred from ever serving an elected office again. I mean, there's just all these crazy things out there. So please, if you have a question as to what something may be doing on conflicts, again, we didn't go into conflicts tonight, please reach out to your staff liaison. If it's complicated enough, they'll be contacting our office. And if the rule of thumb is, please do your job, please make sure you're going forward. But, pardon me, when in doubt, recuse it out. All right, any other questions? Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay. No, I'm running the meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You just didn't know that I was running the meeting. I've got all these new rules and everything, so.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it.
First and foremost, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, taking time, and for all the time that you put in support of our city. It is very much appreciated. I want to also thank city staff who are here for being here and for facilitating. This was something that our council desired to host some time ago, and it's come to fruition. We wanted to make sure that not only ourselves, but those who are operating in boards and commissions knew how to properly conduct a meeting so that we can be as professional as we deal with the public's business. This is the first of what I believe to be a series. The next would be an interest from the council to make sure that those boards and commissions continue to be supported and understand fully their roles and responsibilities for each board and commission that they're on. So at this point, unless any of the council members have anything to offer, we'll consider this workshop adjourned. Thank you.